Welcome to the But She's Your Mother podcast, where we talk about all things related to being raised by narcissistic parents. Our guests are adult survivors of child abuse. Please note that this podcast is intended for mature audiences and may feature topics such as emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, domestic violence, self-harm, suicide, murder, and eating disorders. Opinions expressed by guests and survivors are their own. Some names may be changed or blocked out to protect minors, victims, and survivors. Thank you for listening to But She's Your Mother, the podcast. Today's guest is J.D. McCabe. JD is a domestic violence survivor and the author of The Third Gift, My Dance with the Devil and Her Mother. How did you get out of the psych ward, and how many days were you there in total? And did she come visit you at all? Lots of questions. Sorry.
I love the questions. And in the book, I only dedicated one chapter to my time in the psych facility. I probably could have written 2 or 3. But again, the initial place that he wanted me to go to, I showed up at this place with my little white piece of paper, which probably said, I think I'm going to hurt myself, which I never did. I never had true suicidal ideations. When this doctor asked me, again, I'm looking down at the floor because I'm a broken man. And he says, well, if you lose your family, what will you do? If you guys separate, what will you do? How will you feel? I said, I don't know what I will do. But I didn't say I'm going to put a gun in my mouth or I'm going to jump off a bridge or I'm going to take pills. I said none of that. So I go to this dedicated psych facility. It was awful. It was god awful. I hand the guy behind the window my little white piece of paper. He nonchalantly looks at me and says, it's going to be an 8 to 10 hour wait. Grab a seat. The lobby was jam packed. And as I looked around, it's no offense to the folks that were there. I'm like, I'm not staying here. I said to her, I said, I'm not staying here. And given my line of work, pharmaceuticals, and knowing the hospitals and health systems in the area, I said, we're going to go to this particular hospital. They've got a dedicated psych ward. We'll go there. So I never saw a psychiatrist. The only mental health practitioner I saw was a social worker upon my intake at like 12:30 in the morning in the emergency department. But I would spend 3 days there. The police transport that I already mentioned, I would spend another 6 days in this dedicated psych facility. She only came and visited me twice. And the only reason she came the second time was she had to come to meet with my inpatient social worker, who I got very little time with, but I met with a social worker on a weekend because they wanted to assess the safety in the home because of what they were hearing from her. So while I'm in there, she's working behind my back with nurses and social workers and pumping them with all sorts of information that she's afraid and your daughter's afraid for her safety. So they wanted to meet with us both together to make sure, okay, everything's going to be okay in the home. I would be begrudgingly discharged by my inpatient psychiatrist on my 9th day across these 2 different facilities. I would miss my daughter's 16th birthday because I was locked up. I would later miss her 17th birthday because I wasn't in her life and she really wanted nothing to do with me. But yeah, she only came to visit, really, I would say, 1 time. And we didn't have cell phones. They took everything away from us, of course. Any type of phone calls would be on a payphone, a nasty payphone that everybody was using in the particular unit. And I'll never forget one conversation. She had called me, like it was 9 o'clock on she called me the night of our daughter's birthday just to let me know how it went. But instead of giving me an update on how my daughter was doing and how the birthday went, she laughed in my face. She laughed in my face and said, oh, Danny, I don't know how long you're going to be in there. I have no idea when you're getting out. And I'm like, I am on day 7, fearing for my life, and you're laughing in my face. I missed our daughter's birthday, and you're laughing in my face.
I think that what she was trying to do was ignite you while you were there to make sure that you were going to be there longer. That would be to me, that would be the driving force behind that. When you look at the relationships that she's had with your children, because this is another part of the smear campaign and pulling your children away from you when you don't even know that there's something going on behind the scenes. I want to talk about them a little bit individually. When you,
Sure.
prior to that 7 years where she developed all these sicknesses and the autoimmune and all of that, prior to that, so the first few years of your children's life, take me through her and Katie and what that looked like through the lens you have now.
Well, through the lens I have now, and interestingly, I remember seeing some of your posts. I think it was a post, or maybe listen to one of your podcast episodes about once I was out of the marriage and we were separated, she held on to all of the kids' possessions and pictures and cards, and I got very little of it. I have very little of it to this day, and I've come to terms with it. But the one thing I did get was a Christmas video of both of my kids. From 2001. We had just moved to North Carolina. Katie was probably 2.5 to 3. Billy was maybe 6.5, young kids. And as I watch this video, and I watch it with my kids every Christmas now, it's kind of a what do we call it, a tradition that we follow because it's the only thing that we have left from their childhood. But I see a woman that's disengaged. I have both of the kids on my lap, sitting on the chair. They're opening gifts from Santa, who was played by a neighbor. It was a cute party. She's standing behind in the kitchen, just really disengaged. And that struck me when I saw it. I'm like, wow, I never noticed how disengaged she really was. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say she wasn't a good mother, because as I look at the lens from early years, she was a good mother. But I was more involved than they would later paint that picture. But I would say that my relationship with both of my kids was extremely close, especially, well, both my son definitely, but Katie and I were also very close. And it's why it broke my heart to lose kind of 2 years of her life because of the character assassination and the alienation and so forth, so on. But as I look back now, I would say she was somewhat disengaged. And then once her illnesses, and I use that in quotations, kicked in, it really became about all of her and her health issues. And I picked up an awful lot of slack in addition to traveling a fair amount and working a full-time job. She was, no disrespect to stay-at-home mothers, I want to be very clear with that, but she was essentially a stay-at-home mom.
Were her interactions, to your knowledge, like with Katie, different than her interactions with Billy? Did she have a similar relationship with each of the children, or were her relationships, did they look different?
Billy was off in college when a lot of this started to go down, thank God. And Katie was, I would say Katie would have been 13, 14 when the tension started to build in the marriage. And she started to take more of a control with Katie, meaning Katie was in competitive cheer, and they would travel together for competitive cheer on occasion. I would go. There were some occasions it would be mother and daughter trips that just the moms and daughters were going. And one particular instance, I met them at the airport to pick them up. They were flying back in from a competition in Orlando, Florida. She would not let go of her hand for her to give me a hug as she arrived at the airport. And I'm like, what's going on here?
I remember in the book, you said something about how she would go through Billy's phone log because he broke up with a girlfriend and she was looking to see if they were still in communication. How old was he? Tell me about that. And what was her reasoning behind it?
This was one of its, maybe his second serious girlfriend. He was 16 or 17. She was looking to see if they had broken up, and she actually forced the breakup. My now ex-wife kind of forced the breakup with a kooky story that she made up. She was trolling this poor girl. She was a beautiful girl, nice girl. They weren't headed towards marriage or anything, but they had a fun high school relationship. But my now ex-wife was all over her Facebook stuff and looking at posts from the past of other boyfriends and this and that, and started getting in my son's head like, did you see this? Did you see this? And then she concocted a story about how this girl lied about an uncle dying in 9/11 in the Twin Towers, and told my son that she had heard from somebody that Alexis said that she had an uncle that died. She said, she played the card, and I think she's crazy. I think she's crazy, and you need to break up with her. And this poor girl had the courage to show up at our house with flowers for my ex-wife. And a lot of this didn't make it into the book, but to say, look, let me extend the olive branch. I really like your son, but I didn't make up a lie. I didn't say I had an uncle die in 9/11. Where are you getting that from? And that only further heightened her anger. And that was pretty much the end of it for my son with that relationship.
If it weren't for your ex-wife's interference in their relationship, would they have probably just kept on dating and doing what teenagers do, kind of thing?
I absolutely believe so. And I will say he didn't have another girlfriend until until he went off to college. But he only had like two through his high school years. But that was the one where she really she sabotaged that relationship. And I know there's a lot of episodes on your podcast, but She's Your Mother, that talk about that. And as I look back with tremendous clarity now, I'm like, yeah, she destroyed that relationship. She got in the middle of it and sabotaged it for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Yeah.
Well, they'll pick the relationships that they feel threatened by. And so if they feel like the sunshine is going to be on somebody else over them and that they're going to lose control over their children in particular, they're going to do what they can do to separate that relationship so that they can maintain that control. This is not, as you said, an uncommon thing. With your daughter growing up, what was she like before cheerleading with her? Do you remember, like, what was their interaction like? Because the good mother, saying the words good mother, it's a very blanketed statement. And I think that we tend to think good mother, they feed and clothe the kids and do their hair and make them cute and brush their teeth and put them off to bed, right? But those are just very surface kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's about their actual relationship.
And looking back on it, I would say I would describe it now as, and you're right, I appreciate your insight. So I would say it was surface. She did the necessary basic things. But again, I'm trying to think. So Katie might have been 3 or 4 when Aaron's health issues started to become a central figure in our marriage. And so again, I would pick up a lot of the extra duties and responsibilities with both kids. And even though I worked full time and traveled quite a bit, I can remember taking her to cheer, taking her to competitions, taking him to guitar lessons, and doing my best to adjust my schedule so I could pick up a lot of the slack because of mom's health issues.
How were the children dealing with her health issues? Like, were they trying to take care of her, trying to make her feel better? Were they a little less aware of it? How were they dealing growing up with having a mother who looked like she had these health issues?
I think early on they were very concerned, but then I think they also became numb to it because it's like, well, mom's going to see this doctor again, or mom has to have this test done, or mom, so it became a constant theme for a long time, right up until we were, officially divorced. But if you were to meet her today, God forbid, she would do her very best to convince you that she's got, had a life of hell with these autoimmune diseases and all sorts of stuff that she suffered. But come to find out, when I just discovered the hidden prescription drug addiction, a lot of her health issues, the majority of them were self-inflicted. When you're taking the kind of meds, amphetamines, benzos, mood stabilizers, 4,800 milligrams of gabapentin, also known as Neurontin, you go, how in the hell is she still alive?
You made mention of her using your children for prescriptions or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Share with us, what did that look like? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I didn't discover that until, again, after the third gift revelation, and I spent hours and hours looking at her medical claims and pharmacy claims. It was going through her pharmacy, and I had full legal access to them because I was the primary card holder and paid all the medical bills. I just never knew all the information that I had at my fingertips. And I kicked myself for years going, you had all of this right here and you never looked? Because I wanted somebody, a healthcare professional, to look at her medications. But if you don't tell them honestly what you're taking, they can't do a thorough evaluation. But I wanted someone to look at her medications to see how they were contributing to some of her health issues. So anyhow, once we had separated and I discovered this hidden prescription drug addiction, I built spreadsheets mapping out when she filled her private prescriptions. And of course, this is a woman that would mockingly tell me, I don't even have a username and password for our insurance company's website. I don't even know how to get in there. I'm like, yeah, but you don't need to know how to do that. There's no need for you to be in there. Well, turns out she knew how to get in there because when I called the insurance company and said, how did these get marked private? They said, oh, your wife set that up in her admin, in her profile. I'm like, huh, okay. She always claimed to me she never had access to it. But anyhow, when I uncovered what these private prescriptions were, 2 every month going back 5 years, and I started mapping out when she'd fill them, and I noticed gaps in her filling them. And then I begged the right person at the insurance company, had to make multiple phone calls, but I said, I'm paying all the medical bills. I want to know who's writing them and what they are. So it turns out she was taking Adderall, Adderall XR, Ritalin LA, on top of the benzos and on top of other things. And so I started mapping that out, started noticing some gaps. And so I went and looked at my kids' insurance claims. Just out of the blue, I looked at their pharmacy claims, and lo and behold, they have prescriptions that are marked private too. And so my daughter was a minor. My son was not a minor. So I said, I'll just get the records from my daughter. My daughter was a minor. So I got all her pharmacy records, and I could see, who wrote the prescriptions, and I could see what the prescriptions were. But then I had to peel back the onion a little further, because whoever was writing the prescriptions for my soon to be ex-wife, I discovered through the internet that this guy, who she deemed her miracle worker, he was in trouble with the North Carolina Medical Board and the DEA for inappropriate prescribing of narcotics. So she would go and pay, and I would discover a lot of this after the fact. She would go pay $250 cash for a BS exam, and he would write her whatever the heck she wanted. So once that dried up and he had his license suspended, she had to go doctor shopping again and find yet another psychiatrist or whatever. This guy wasn't even a psychiatrist. He was a neurologist, but she found a psychiatrist that was willing to write whatever the hell she asked for.
So she had prescriptions put in your children's names so that she could take the doses that she wanted, and also have prescriptions in her name as well.
Yeah,
And here she is with this autoimmune disease, going into the hospital, likely not disclosing any of the actual medications she was really on.
that's correct. And let me clarify one thing. So once this guy, her miracle worker, got in trouble with the DEA, that's when I noticed significant gaps. And I'm like, as I did my research on this guy and discovered the DEA was all over him and all that stuff was all on the internet, that's what forced me to go look at my kids' prescriptions, because I'm like, okay, she lost her supplier for a while. And so it was with the kids. It was with the kids. And again, I got my daughter's medical records from the family practitioner, the same family practitioner, I might add, that involuntarily committed me, that she had been writing letters behind my back to. But I discovered that my daughter was not seen at all by this guy. Now, my son was legitimately diagnosed with ADHD in 4th grade. He was on it just during the school year until his 10th grade year in high school. Started working out. He didn't like the appetite suppressant. He got off it. She continued his prescriptions. She would call in the refills for him. And then she had my daughter put on it. And I know my daughter, because at the time, my daughter's like, tried Ritalin and said, Dad, I don't like it. I said, well, then don't take it. You don't need it. So I think my now ex-wife also has clearly had some Munchausen's by proxy going on with my daughter as well. Had her evaluated for an autoimmune disease, all sorts of stuff. And so, yeah, she used, until she could find a psychiatrist that would write whatever she wanted, she used our kids to fill them she used their prescriptions.
How old was your daughter when your ex-wife was having her evaluated for autoimmune diseases? And what did she say was her reasoning behind that?
She was probably 14 or 15, maybe, because mom had her autoimmune disease. She, wanted to have her checked out just for genetic purposes, make sure everything was all right with her. And I think a lot of the anxiety that my daughter still struggles with today, and they're both doing extremely well. I couldn't be prouder of them. But the anxiety she struggles with, I think, is because of a lot of hearing from mom that she's got, as as you know too well, hearing from mom that she might have this issue or that health issue or whatever. Yeah, it was probably in her early teens that she started to have her evaluated for autoimmune disease.
Was she ever actually formally diagnosed with an autoimmune disease?
Nope. And that's the crazy thing that came out at the alimony trial, because we subpoenaed all of her medical records, because their argument was going to be, which it was, well, she's way too sick with all her health issues and her autoimmune. She's way too sick to ever work full time. But yeah, there's nothing. Prestigious clinics, she bounced all over to major academic med centers. She bounced all over to, a couple of prestigious clinics down in Florida, went there by herself because I was home taking care of the kids. But it was like she was at the Ritz when she was at these places, because they would do comprehensive exams. But once we subpoenaed the medical records say the exact opposite. From this particular clinic, it says she doesn't have an autoimmune disease. And if she has anything, she has a very, very minor form of it. So I now know that it was all in her head. And again, as I look back on all the symptoms and things that she had, cardiac issues, bowel issues, it's like all of those are directly related to the massive amount of prescription medication she was taking.
So she was basically making herself sick. What autoimmune disease did she say she had? And I'm guessing from what you're saying, she was telling you she had something when in fact she was never diagnosed. And because you weren't there at that particular appointment, correct me if I'm wrong, you just took it on face value because here's your wife and you're sick and you're so maybe happy to have an answer.
Yeah, I changed it in the book. I don't mind saying it on here, but I changed it in the book to fibromyalgia because the publisher wanted me to change it. But she would allege that she had lupus. And I went with her to a lot of her specialist appointments. I went with her when she had all these cardiac exams. I was with her, and this is again a red flag, as they say, and I hate that phrase. But in 2001, I was by her bedside when she first began the evaluation for this. And this very prestigious rheumatologist at an academic med center said to her, "You don't have lupus. You don't have any autoimmune disease. You're a type A personality, and it's all in your head." Now, for me, with his very dismissive bedside, and I thought rude bedside manner, I dismissed it. And of course, she would allegedly move on to get a second opinion from somebody. And so, with the broken healthcare system that we have in the US, she was able to bounce from one facility to another facility and simply self-report what she had.
And what's so sad to me about that is there are legitimate cases where people go to medical professionals to find out what's wrong with them. And there are times where a doctor will say something like that and they're in fact wrong, right? And so she
Yes.
really adds fuel to that fire and damages those people who actually are sick and in need of help. So that's just another one of those ripple effects of these types of personalities and the further damage that they cause, not just to their family, but people that they've never even met before. Let's back up to the infidelity and the beginning of the accusations and what was going on then, because I know that she contracted herpes, which you never did. So go back to that. Talk to me about that. And how many years were you married when this stuff started to present?
So the herpes was not until after I separated, again at mediation, when she made that accusation. And all of the other, she pretty much contracted every STD out there. As I would dig into the medical claims and pharmacy claims and see OBGYNs that she was seeing, that I'm like, she never, who's this doctor? What's this medication? What? Why is she being tested for this? Fortunately, being in the medical pharmaceutical field, I knew how to decipher some of this information. The accusations, Marnie, began in 2010, probably 17 years into our marriage, is when she came home from, she was seeing a therapist. She was seeing a therapist, which I supported because of her father's death. And as you may recall, she had been estranged from her father for 10 years when we met. She reconnected, then she lost her father 5 years into their reunification. And I thought that was, once I discovered all of this stuff, especially the drug addiction, I thought, well, that was her tipping point when her father passed away. So she was seeing a therapist. She would come home and she would say to me, my therapist says I have the right to see your emails and your your phone and all that, because, you know, she thinks you're cheating on me. And I'm like,
Next time on, but she's your mother.
what are you talking about? I said, first of all, I have no passcode on my phone. You know my username and password from my personal email. Go through it. And, you know, I ignored my intuition because I probably should have said, let me see your phone and let me see your email. I would later discover